You're laughing.
Oh yeah.
I think we're live. I don't know if this is kind of good. Little. There we go. So this is the theme song. That's my theme song. I'm your host, Mitch Hampton, and this is a very special, auspicious occasion because we have a special guest, Eddie Abreu. Eddie Abreu, welcome.
Thank you, Mitch, for having me on your show. It's a pleasure.
It's really unique because we've been talking mainly online, right? I think, and only just kind of I know a person who knows a person. I think Stephanie introduced us, right?
Yes, she did.
And Stephanie says you have to meet Eddie because you dress like him, etc. And we have a lot in common, and we're both autistic.
Yes.
Right? Stephanie's autistic. I'm autistic. You're autistic.
Yes.
And I thought, you're so articulate and intelligent and compassionate when discussing we who are neurodivergent.
Yes.
I thought maybe you should come on the show. We're going to get to some other stuff too. We're just not going to. It's not just going to be neurodivergence, but I thought it would be good if you expressed some of the things you've been talking about in other forums and whatever you're comfortable talking about. If you could tell me, about your, psychology or your diagnosis or what it means, or also your feelings about where do you think this movement's going to go, and what you're, because you're an activist, of course, and you're also a tutor, and I thought it would be okay to would it be okay to talk about that, because I know
sure.
That's something I've never done, and it's very interesting to me. And so, where do you want to begin? You want to talk about?
Well, I would like to begin how I was diagnosed. So, the main story that my family told me many, many times before was that I was diagnosed on the spectrum when I was 3 years old.
Oh, wow.
And at that time, my mindset was shaped differently than most of my neurotypical peers, because generally I was very observant, but also very quiet. One of my earliest memories growing up was when I was 16 months old. And I can remember distinctively and visually in my crib crying, looking up at the ceiling, and also to my right where my parents slept. So I was very observant, not in the ways that how human beings interact with each other, but they reflect in me the instinctiveness between the relationship, or shall I say the interrelationship between human beings at bay, especially if you're nurturing the prospects of the world around you and the stimuli that surrounds the environment. And as I got older,
may I interject? Just hold that thought. I think it's remarkable how early you remember, because you're talking about months old. Now, I know it's controversial in psychology. There's also this thing of people can't remember their birth. I remember my birth, and I remember the early months. This is something that's really so. Does this connect to what you were talking about? Because it's very early. You're saying I'm such and such an age. Is this something that's has to do with the spectrum, or is it different, or
not exactly, because if you research a lot of psychological papers that were published between 5 to 10 years ago, they will state that the earliest memories for an autistic individual date between 10 to 12 months. Even before the aspects of the memorization skills that are put in place by a neurotypical, let's say between 24 to 1 year old, because naturally for an autistic, and there are people like me who have the same thing in their own prospective births, and growing up with that same mindset, they instill within them and within their own consciousness the ability to reflect on the world around them
Interesting.
and the stimuli that surrounds it. So
Interesting.
if many people read these reports, then they'll have a better understanding of how and when the outgrowth and the formalization of how autistics grow, breathe, thrive, and how they embody the distinctiveness between each and every one of us, and how they in turn reflect on
Yeah.
the specialty that reflects on the human experience.
Well, that's quite. I want to go backtrack because you were talking about the early months in your diagnosis, and I unfairly interrupted just because I wanted to. I was really asking if you had any insight into that, because as you know, I'm sure you're aware that there are all these debates on what you can remember, what you can't remember. But
Yes.
you'll agree with me that spiritually, we can remember these are just fallacies, that get reported that you can't do this, you can't do that. And, I'm sure you've known people that remember birth, right? Or maybe you
Yes.
yourself. Yeah. So this is not, I just wanted to clear that up. Sorry, I didn't mean to get all sidetracked.
That's all right. I
But,
was also planning. I was going to add though that the autistic brain formulates much differently than the neurotypical, because
yeah.
also according to psychology and even in neurology, there
Hmm.
have been published reports of development of autistic brains and especially even neurotypical brains
Yeah.
prior before their birth, because their brains grow faster and the left cervix of the brain
Huh.
functions more in a way where the stimuli, the environmental aspects of
Right.
it, and the intuition factors that go behind the reasoning processes that are inclined within each and every individual
Right.
who is either both autistic and or neurodivergent,
Right.
or same thing altogether, then it embodies the exposure of that stimuli.
Yeah.
And to put it into that perspective, it
Yeah.
aligns with the experiences which are being shown based on a front and center lens. So
Right.
we are the observers
Hmm.
of acknowledging
Yeah.
what goes on beforehand, especially even before we open our
Our
mouths.
mouth.
Yes.
That's true. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I want to hear more about the doctors, the psychologists your family encountered. Of course, I'm sure you'll share that with us if you
Yes.
don't mind sharing that. But this made me think of this thing about observation. There was a ex-CIA operative
Yes.
that I heard interviewed, and he was talking about psychology. And one of the things he says that the mistake most people make is that they stay in perception but don't go to perspective.
Well, that is true.
Well,
That's
because
true.
perspective. Now he's defining these words in a special way, and he's trained by CIA, which is
Yes.
not good. I'm no fan of
Yes.
that, but let's
Yes.
let's just stick to that. But one of the things he does know about is that people stick with just their own personal feeling and their ego, which is perception. Perspective is when you have a more empirical, you kind of see what's going on, and you compile the facts first, and then you reach your conclusion later. Is that what you were talking about? It's kind of like, yeah.
Well, it's kind of broad because even if you add all the things up together, and since we have a saying within the autism community that our brains can interact and interject information
That's
like
right.
sponges,
Like
we have to
sponges. Yeah.
organize in a way that places the information from top to bottom. So, since we are very descriptive people and since
Mhm.
we are very articulate, then it is the ability of the individual to recognize and focus on
Sure.
the
Sure.
traits
Sure.
that really possess the
Yeah.
individual's interest. So the interest at bay is also aligned with the mentality of the individual's true perceptions of reality based on their psychological and
Makes
psychoanalytical features of their personality. So when you realize this, then all things are in order, and you realize then that everything that is shaped in order recognizes the truest, the truest and most important aspects of any type of conversation or any observation by other people based
right.
on their particular methods
Right.
and how they use their methods to either deceive or even to bring joy
Sure.
to many others.
Sure. Well, it's all what you do with what you got. You know, you don't want to.
Yes.
Don't want to. Yeah, I mean, but I think yeah. So were you? Was it a psychologist that your parents knew, or did they, or was it something that Because I'm 54.
Yes.
I'm older than you, and I got diagnosed at like age 50. You
Yes.
getting diagnosed like basically the birth became at what, age 3? So
Yeah.
so I don't know. What do you make of that? That's funny, right? Like it's kind of a different.
Yeah. I mean, it's not too surprising that a lot of people are getting diagnosed in their 40s, 50s,
Yeah,
even into their 60s,
yeah.
because now the campaign to bring awareness and
Mhm.
acceptance to autistic peoples is growing even stronger than ever, thanks to the autism rights movement,
That's
because
right. That's right.
over the past few decades, we have made strides in recognizing who we are and what we are.
Right.
Because many of this information that we're talking about wasn't available
Wasn't
between
available.
35 and 35 years ago, because that
Yeah,
was kept back in the open. But the
yeah.
psychologists knew at that time, and I'm talking about going back as far as even after the 1940s,
Wow.
even after Hans Asperger,
That's
who we all hate, who was
Do we all hate him? Is there a consensus about because it was Nazism or because of his?
well, the reason Asperger's syndrome is no longer part of
Yeah.
the psychological curriculum was that it was many people found out that Hans Asperger was a notorious Nazi, and he
Absolutely.
was responsible for the euthanization
Dehumanization.
of 1,100 children, especially
Yeah,
kidnapped children from
that's
Eastern
right.
European countries.
Yeah.
And there has been a rumor that he collaborated also with Dr. Josef Mengele.
Oh,
Yeah, and they teamed up to do experiments on these children
yeah.
and publish reports that were basically went back and forth between many of the established HQ quarters in the
Sure.
occupied countries, and even in psychological circles within the Nazi Party, to determine the inferiority superiority complex between children who claim to be um, feeble-minded, which was a term at that time.
Yeah.
And because of that, they separated children into two distinctive factors. And in one of Mr. Asperger's reports, he noted that for a touch of autism is significant, whether if you're in the arts or in the sciences.
Mm-hmm.
And he further stated that in these reports that he concluded,
Yeah.
he felt that the individual who is most enhanced can really typify the individual's two conceptions of their own normality, which means that
And
the individual can be reflective based on the contributions based on their stimuli and the exposure to that stimuli, because they're the ones who are the gift makers or the superiority makers that basically reflect on their supremacist values. The other children, for
well,
example,
you
were
understand that I mean, just all that stuff you just
yeah,
said that he thought that's basic. That's just that's just more of that kind of
well, yeah,
fascistic type
well,
of
yeah,
mentality.
yeah,
And so that's what's wrong with that. And that's
yeah.
but were you part of the activism to try to expose the truth about Hans Asperger?
Well, yes, because unbeknownst to some people, eugenics laws are still part of the law books in the
Yeah,
United States.
yeah,
And even though they've been struck down since the late 1960s, and
yeah,
there have been reparations by
yeah.
many people who suffered, who were, I mean,
Vic-
even though there were many victims, not just for us neurodivergent, but also within the Black, Hispanic, and Native American communities who underwent sterilization, and they themselves
Yeah,
underwent reparations for that, because they were told lies
yeah,
all their lives, because they were told that they couldn't conceive, when in fact the
yeah.
reason they prevented their births from happening was to prevent so-called races from
Mixing.
from mixing,
Yeah.
and not only that, but
That's
also
that whole So what you're saying is that the history of autism has that is I guess the word would be corrupted or
yes,
by that, but there's still a kernel there, right? That's good, right? There's still,
yes.
I mean, there's still like the part that people scholars today are trying to, I guess,
Yes.
wrestle with. But what do you when you are you finding out about this around the time as a child, as a boy, and you're getting your diagnosis? Or what was your what was some? I know there's so many questions that come up, of course, about bullying, about school environment, and about I don't know, just whatever comes to your mind, what you think about those years, and you think about you're coming to consciousness and awareness. Or
Well, I can say for myself that throughout my entire years in school, I was very quiet, but I never interacted because a lot of people didn't understand who I was mentally, socially, and
right,
psychologically
right,
because I was different than all of the neurotypicals combined.
sure.
And I had to, I there was a lot of peer pressure at that time for me to fit in, but as I got older, I realized that it wasn't the case because I then realized for a fact that by the time I got into middle school, I had to realize that in order to be myself, I had to be who I am.
Right.
So one of the things I did growing up, and one of the memories that has instilled in me since then was reading.
Oh yeah.
And
Look,
oh yes, Steph said
all
she's
these,
gonna read me.
look. I got all these. Look at all that.
Yes.
Look
Oh
at that
yes.
reading.
Yes.
It's important.
Oh yes. Um, yes. I don't know if you see in the background that I have a very huge book collection. So I have a lot of books.
I'm showing it.
Oh sure.
This is great. Eddie and I love two things: books and clothes.
Yeah.
That's a very
This,
big. Oh wow.
yeah. This is
I
only.
really love how organized your bookshelf is. You seem to have a really good system.
Yeah.
You seem to have a
There's
really
a lot more though because I have
yeah.
books all around me, and I have
Yeah.
a bookshelf right next to me as I'm talking to you right now.
Yeah.
And I and for me, I buy books almost every day. So
Oh, okay.
yeah, so I save a lot of money,
Yeah, you got
and I buy a lot
huh.
of books, either between 6 or 12 books, because
Huh.
um, as many of my friends know, I'm
Eddie,
a book.
Eddie, your mind is like mine.
Oh yes,
Your mind is like mine. I didn't that's something.
yes, yes.
I wanted to show you this. Are you a fan of Dita Von Teese?
Oh yes, she's
Can
one.
I show you something?
Oh yes, yes.
I have this.
Oh yes.
You remember when this came out about 20 years ago?
Oh yes.
I thought you would appreciate this.
Wow.
And there's like no, but I have a first edition of this.
Yes.
Like
I can't say. Oh yeah.
it's probably hard to see, but
Yeah. I mean, she's a wonderful burlesque dancer, and she has made contributions to the neo burlesque genre. And
absolutely.
a lot of people don't know this as well, that she was instrumental in reviving burlesque as an art form.
And it's
And
kind of a
yeah, I mean,
I mean, I only bring this up because you mentioned I was reading your post on FB and I thought I saw a Dita Von Teese book or something. I don't remember what it was. It was something you said this was an influence on me. I thought, well, wow, I got to bring out.
well, Dita Von Teese is one of the great burlesque artists of our time, and she's a constant contributor to the art of neo burlesque, and she has made a lot of great inroads in reviving that lost art. And I think that today, in the vintage community, we owe a great debt to her, because without that, we would not have a community such as this today. Because let's face it,
she created
the nostalgia of yesterday reflects on what's going to happen today and tomorrow.
That's true.
And by that, she has single-handedly, well, she's created a lot of barriers. Well, she's broken down a lot of barriers, and she is a great contributor. And I think that the world will remember her 50 to 100 years from now, that she is a outstanding burlesque artist. And I have some friends who do burlesque, and they take up a lot of inspiration from her because she has this authentic,
Yeah.
distinctive
Yeah.
artiste within her that embodies that, and
Yeah.
she is, without a shadow of a doubt, the best there is, bar
Yeah.
none.
Yeah. That's probably true. That's the only reason why, but that's a,
Yeah.
you're buying 9 books. I mean, I don't, so do you speed read? I guess you speed read, right?
I don't speed read, but I take my time because generally for me, since I have a huge book collection and the bookshelf I just showed you just now, it's just a half of it because I have a
Sure. Sure.
huge book collection.
Sure.
Yeah, it takes up my entire apartment. And one of the things that I enjoy about books
Yeah.
is the ability to understand and comprehend knowledge, and
Sure.
how knowledge is reflected within the beholder. And what I remember growing up reading was that when I was about, I think, 19 to 1 year, between 19 months to a year old, my mom taught me to read. And I learned that by following what she told me
Right.
to basically discover the basics,
Yeah.
phonics, and all that stuff. So by the time I was about 2 or even 3.5 years old, even after I was
Yeah.
diagnosed, I was very far advanced towards the many peers that I interact with, especially
Right.
now, because a lot of people always come up to me and say, "How do you know so much?" And I always tell them,
That's well,
"Well, I read a lot."
reading. I read a lot. Yeah, reading helps.
Yes.
Reading helps a lot. But did you? I guess were there certain pluses or positive aspects of being the generation you are? Because there's been improvements concerning neurodivergence, you think, or is it? I mean, what I'm saying, do you know what I mean? Is there pluses there, or is it?
Oh yes, there's been a lot of improvements in the
Yeah,
neurodiversity
yeah,
community, but I think there needs to be more change to happen
sure,
because in our community we still face barriers, we still face a lot of discrimination,
absolutely.
and not only that, we face a lot of ableism because
Yeah,
this society does not work for us because
yeah.
of the fact that our minds are
It's
shaped in
actually designed the opposite of how we tick.
yes, yes,
Completely the opposite. It
yes,
drives me. It drives me insane. It's a daily.
yes,
But so
because
you're okay. Go ahead. You have more to say
oh,
about
okay,
it. Yeah.
it's upsetting that a lot of people still face, well, a lot of people think in their own minds that their mentalities reflected within the stereotypes of who we are
Yeah.
still reflected in years past, but it's not like that because we've been in existence for 70,000 years and we have made contributions in
Right.
the arts, sciences, and the humanities,
Absolutely.
and we have made inroads in achieving change in understanding the abilities and the confrontations that go behind it, especially as we evolve in a neurotypical society.
Yeah.
We tend to really reflect on what we've been through and how we instilled that to really comprehend the scenario of what will happen next and in the future. So as long as we're still going to be around, because we still face a lot of enemies, typically the anti-vaxxers for that sort. We're still going to be here 70,000 years from now,
Sure.
and I can
Well,
honestly
um what is your feeling about um where we go from here? I mean, you have certain goals, political goals. Um,
well, I
what other goals for our community? If that's and how do those goals connect with your work as a tutor, or are those separate? Or are they? Excuse me, if there's a connection there. Or,
well, I was a tutor for many years. Then I turned to writing
yeah,
because I felt that I wanted to get my message out in terms of understanding and relating towards others how
yeah,
we feel living in a
right,
society such as this, which I've mentioned to you before,
Is
does
able.
not work in a specified order. So, as far as our future goes with my activism, I think that what we see within ourselves is comprehensive towards what we feel within our own minds and our own hearts, because we have to really delve into the mind of the mindset of who we are and what we are. So it's
Right.
not like we can't do the things that we want to do, because the most basic stereotype of many people, especially neurotypicals in general, is that we can't do this, we can't do that. I
Right.
think that's just wrong, because we have the potential and the ability to do these kinds of
Sure.
things.
Sure.
And the more we relate to this, the more we are able to really define our own inner humanity,
Right.
because we are empaths, and our empaths
Mm,
give us the quality of knowledge and the know how to really delve into what we find within ourselves and
yeah.
how we touch the lives and hearts of others. So, as far as I'm concerned, then we have the potential to change the minds and hearts of others.
Yeah. That's a great approach. That's a great approach. I mean, I'm not as active as you are. I'm not probably because I'm so busy, writing music and it's doing this podcast. I'm not really a political animal to that extent. But I'm glad you are. That's
Yes. Well, basically, I identify myself as a free thinker, but typically I consider myself to be a Marxist, because I think that coming from you, Mitch, since you mentioned in that interview with Stephanie back in November, if my mind serves me right, that you and Stephanie share the same beliefs in terms of understanding and achieving the goals within the underdog. So I believe that within
right.
my
I should clarify. I'm not a Marxist
oh
at all, but I am a socialist. But that's a
oh
whole.
yeah oh yes yes
We could work out those differences or similarities.
oh
But
yes
yeah.
oh yes. I
But
mean, yes, we both have the same political beliefs.
yeah.
And I think that for a lot of us, especially
Right.
those who lean left, I think that the underdog is our best friend.
Yeah.
And I
Sure.
also think that for many of us, and especially in the autistic community in general,
Mhm.
we have a lot of leftists who are very active. So they
That's
are very passionate about social change and
true.
the elimination of man's inhumanity to man based on its exploitation, and
Yeah.
how capitalism oppresses us
Yeah.
to work for people who only profit to benefit their own interests and not for ourselves.
Right.
Because I strongly believe that our ableism is a component of the oppressive capitalistic system that we experience within our society. So, in terms of understanding our appreciation of all things left wing, then I could say within the bottom of my heart that the underdog is always going to be our best friend, because I
Yeah.
think that we should put humanity first and
Yeah.
people first instead of profits. And I think
That's
that
right.
the artistic and psychosocial values of humankind reflect on our own creativity, whereas we can create and discover a new society which is built by the backs of our interests,
Interest. Right.
and more than that, preserving the state of humanity for the
Right.
sake of what we benefit for ourselves and for many others. Because I think that nowadays, um, since we are living in typically we are almost moving into a multipolar world
Yeah.
where a lot of the anti-imperialist powers are taking a big step in fighting back against American imperialism, capitalism,
Yeah.
xenophobia,
Right.
and racism, which has been brought about by Western society and its 500 years of capitalist imperialist exploitation of the masses of the masses of Asia, Africa, and the Americas. I believe that the theme of the working class, as well as anti-imperialism in general, is the strength and resolve of putting people in power for the
Yeah.
sake of serving the needs of the people, rather than serving the needs and interests of businessmen and oligarchs, which historically and generally typically use those interests to exploit the people for the sake of their own personal
Wow.
amusement,
Right.
and to really benefit from acknowledging their own existence, which is superfluous in their own negative sense.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. Are you so I know that you have seemed to have a rich understanding of things. When did you get into clothes? Like I'm into clothes. I've been into it for 30 years and you're a lot younger. Was it from the vintage community or was it before that or what is that?
Well, actually, I was very much influenced by vintage and Italian fashion because growing up,
Uh-huh.
my mom used to dress very wonderfully, and that
Uh-huh.
in turn, well, she was basically an old-fashioned individual,
Okay.
and she took a lot of influences from many years back because she grew up in the '60s.
Oh, yeah.
So by the time I got older, I emolded myself into dressing more like my own authentic self, which is my well, shall we say, my masculine vintage self.
Right, right.
So one of the things that I was very fascinated was
Eddie, how many selves do you have, you think?
subs,
How many selves do you have?
selves.
Selves.
Not a lot. I mean, I have to check because
Hmm.
I think it's between 5 or 6, but I still have to check because I think I got more last time, but I have to check them out to see what if I bought some or
Yeah,
anything like that.
right. Well, you said your authentic self. I was just wondering,
Oh,
if we
because
contain different selves. I'm wondering if you, I
oh
mean,
well,
selves.
actually, what I meant was when I say my authentic self, I
Yeah,
mean my inward outward ability to really define who I am because
right,
as I defined my own perfectionism, I was basically knowing and trying to create something within myself that aligns with my own true wisdom. And
right,
that true wisdom was to get my better self known before my unconscious self might
right.
overtake me.
Sure. Is that something that's a daily? Do you think it's a daily practice? Or,
Oh, yes, because I think that if you read Herman Hesse's Siddhartha, which is a very great book,
what book?
um, huh?
I'm sorry. What book was that?
Siddhartha by Herman Hesse.
Oh, yes. Arthur's great. Yes, Arthur's
Yes,
great.
very great writer, and also a very great philosopher, by the way.
That's right. Yeah.
If you read his book,
Love that.
his treatise on the metaphysical and even psychological aspects of the human mind typically refine itself towards the truest most aspects of the individual self. And when I say the individual self, we constantly come through multiple dimensions. And
That's right. Yep.
as we go through time and
Mhm.
space, we continue to emold ourselves within the psychoanalytical prospects of
Mhm.
dealing and knowing the true wisdom
Yeah.
of defining our true destiny, which is within the 10th dimension. So, as we are
Yeah.
living now here on Earth, we are living in the third dimension. So, the third dimension is based on our preoccupation with materialism. And
Huh.
I have a very strong stance against materialism because I'm not a material guy at all.
Right.
And as a strong minimalist, I believe
Huh.
that the ethics and values of minimalism, which is having less for something that you gain in
Mhm.
order to benefit your true authentic self, which is basically part of
Huh.
historic teachings going back as far as 1000 to 1200
1,000 years.
years.
Right.
Um,
Huh.
we align ourselves within that type of dimension, but as we thrive and prosper and even grow at the same time, we still have to catch up within the 10th dimension because the 10th dimension is there for us to acknowledge the true self and the true self
Right.
that creates the inner wisdom that defines who
Huh.
we are, what can we accomplish, and what can we do to serve
Huh.
others in need.
That gives me a lot to think about. I have to think about. So you identify as a minimalist, huh?
Yes.
Huh. Interesting.
It's basically a understanding of non-materialism because
Right.
people, as a matter of fact, if you get to meet a lot of people and they tell you that if you're a minimalist and that person says, "What's that?" They'll tell you that it's a lesser form of materialism, but it's not generally the case, because if you're a materialist and you're preoccupied or even distracted by what you don't want to acknowledge in the first place. So you typically distract yourself with that, but furthermore, you typically define your true wisdom, which unfortunately, even if you come into your true wisdom in your fourth dimensional self, it does not align by your true aspects of reality under the knowledge of self, because everybody has to have a knowledge of self. You
Yeah, that's a
constantly
thing. Well, everybody. Well, so that's interesting. One of the things I like about you, Eddie, is you speak with subordinate clauses,
yes.
and you speak in like complete sentences
Oh yes.
and paragraphs.
Yes.
Do you think that the quality of conversation has declined because people? Do you know what I mean? It's like,
Oh yes. Yes.
what do you make of the fact that what do people think of the fact that the world values incomplete sentences and right,
Oh
and
yes.
just kind of very shallow.
Yes.
What you have some looks like you have some thoughts about that.
Oh yes, because it's sad that now with the invention of cell phones,
Yeah.
people are so preoccupied on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and many other social media websites that
Right.
they don't even realize what's really going on in the world.
Yeah.
Because in order to have a clear conversation, you have to really understand the basics. You have to sit down and look at yourself and the world around you and think about what you really want to do in terms of conversation. In a conversation, you have to interact, and based on the interest of that conversation, you can
Right.
really align by
Right.
what you're dealing and what you're knowing, basically defining your own characteristics. But in a more generalized sense of the term, we tend to forget our inner inhibitions and just let bygones be bygones, because
Right.
having a little conversation is just too distracted for them.
Yeah.
So I think that nowadays,
Yeah.
especially as time goes on, and since we're almost into the mid 2020s, I think that conversation and even letter writing as well is now a lost art.
Yeah. Letter
Because
writing. We
yeah.
got it. Yeah. So you're a fan of letter writing, right?
Oh
Oh,
yes, I
yeah.
yes, because with that, well, well, if you put the two together,
Yeah.
it's basically formalized,
Yeah.
but in a sense that
Are there other? Hold that thought. Are there other Herman Hesse books you'd recommend? Because I think he wrote more things than Siddhartha. I think.
oh
Dane,
yes,
what was some of the other books you would tell people to read by him? Because I didn't mean
well,
to.
it's a very hard choice because I like all of his work. Typically, his own treatises on spirituality and atheism, which is basically part of his theme regarding about um, well, shall we say, the psychoanalytical self. I
Right.
think that with his writings, which are basically influential and
Yeah.
basically um, part of the literary apotheosis of basically every philosopher throughout the ages, I think that I can say that almost all of his work have somehow paid off. But
Mhm.
I think that if you read one of his early works, I forgot the name of it, but it deals with the realism and the specialties that go along with it,
Right. Right.
then I think that it aligns with what we say within ourselves and the mentality of the world around us.
Well, I studied. So I read two of his books in high school as part of a class in fiction. You know,
Interesting.
and I'm trying to remember what the other one was. It was Siddhartha, and then it was it Narcissus and does that ring a bell? Narcissus.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the other one. Narcissus and again, that's very complicated. That could be its own episode. Certainly.
Yeah.
I mean, I was very happy when I talked to Stephanie. Stephanie and I both shared that we're both metaphysical. In other words, that we weren't.
Yes.
We are aware that we're not just, not just this, that there's another thing going on, without defining too clearly what that other thing is, right? But that's no thing. And I'm glad to hear that you're interested in those things.
Yes. I think metaphysics in general, I truly believe that the metaphysical qualms about oneself can typically define the imagery and the mentality of the human experience. So by studying Hesse's work, I think Schopenhauer in general, who is also
Schopenhauer is very underrated.
Yeah, because
Schopenhauer is very underrated. I actually think Schopenhauer. Well, say what you want to say about him, because he's kind of.
Oh yeah, because I think he had the same. I think Schopenhauer, who is also one of the great philosophers of the 18th century,
and was autistic.
Yeah, and
right?
Yeah, I think so, but I'm not so sure.
I'm sure.
I think that
I'm putting my money on it. We could talk about autistics before diagnoses.
Yes. I think Schopenhauer, who I'm greatly influenced by him, and he has such amazing ethics regarding about the interrelationships between reality and vice versa.
That's right.
His own authentic realism has somehow changed the course of the psychosocial thought of the 18th and early 19th centuries, because at that time, even during the Age of Enlightenment, there was a new movement that was spread across Western Europe that reflected upon the comeuppance of the individual. And they typically influence French philosophers who are trying to mold the distinctive aspects between their search for meaning and their own search of life based on their own mentality. And their own metaphysical qualms about that is that Schopenhauer in his lifetime wrote many great articles and pieces regarding about the state of the world through the metaphysical and even the realism that embodies the truest, most aspect forms of human individuality. And this was even before the existence of existentialism came into being.
Yeah.
So I think that with
it predicts that. It predicts it a lot. I mean, of course, don't you think there's a tension? Because Isaiah Berlin discusses the tension between the French and the Germans historically in the West. And there's this tension that the French tend to be, and this is Berlin's formulation, very rationalistic, almost anti-metaphysical. And the Germans at that time, like Schopenhauer, were more open to mysticism, a little less rationalistic. Like there's that you'll agree that there's that kind of
yes.
It's interesting.
Yes, because I think that even prior before the Age of Enlightenment, there was a series of philosophers, even basically using their influences from Greek and Roman philosophy, that the existence of the state of the world within their consciousness was aligned by the true mentality of their own authentic selves, namely by understanding and achieving the contributions of the soul. And when we think about the soul, for example,
that's a real thing.
We think about the reflections that go behind it and how they are intertwined. So with that, and even if you study many people such as Machiavelli, because Machiavelli, even before he wrote The Prince, he was very observant based on the relationship between the existence of society and the metaphysical aspects of society.
Eddie, have you read Isaiah Berlin's The Originality of Machiavelli? That's a great essay, an important essay.
Oh, no, I haven't.
Well, Isaiah Berlin makes the case that Machiavelli is this innovative thinker. I mean, he goes really far. He says Machiavelli introduces sincerity.
Oh, yes.
That sincerity was not a concept before. I mean, that's a very strong claim, but don't you think that Machiavelli has been misunderstood and misused by the right wing? The right wing does everything. They take great thinkers and try to make those thinkers their own, but is this kind of selfish, manipulative? But so talk about the real Machiavelli, the ethical Machiavelli. That's not.
Machiavelli. Contrary to what many people think about Machiavelli, Machiavelli was and is one of the great philosophers, and even I could say social scientists of all time.
Absolutely.
Because he himself believed that the ethics and values of society are intertwined with each other.
Hmm.
And right before Nietzsche and Hume, who were influential in borrowing most of Machiavelli's works,
Right.
Machiavelli himself believed that that interrelationship between society and the general order of things, especially the power structure in general, is
Yeah.
intertwined by the individual,
Uh,
not by the beholder. Because
right.
during the Renaissance, there was a shift in geopolitics
That's
where
right.
many of the monarchs of France, England, and especially the early Tsarist reigns of the Russian Empire,
Right.
they created power structures within themselves to intertwine based on the interests of the nobility rather than the fact that the people themselves are of the nobility. So if Machiavelli
Mhm.
himself at the time, who he was controlled by the Borgias, and the
Right.
Borgias were one
Right.
of the most influential families in the Renaissance, where they had many branches um, in basically almost every European royal family then, and they still have descendants now. When
Mhm.
speaking about the 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 British and even the Norwegian royal families,
Yeah.
then you start to see a new type of thought being processed,
Yeah. That's true. That's true.
and
Well, that type of thought, when you say that type of thought, is sort of a mixed bag,
well,
meaning
yeah,
it has some positive elements, it has some unethical elements, it has some prejudices, it has some progressive. It's
yes,
like some things are progressive, some things are reactionary. It's a weird mixture. There's some things that are the kind of proto-democratic, and then there are other things that are
yes,
feudal. So it's not all right. It's kind of a mixture.
I
When you
see.
say it's a mixture.
Yes. Well, to sum up Machiavelli's legacy, he
It's
was
hard. Yeah, it's hard.
well. I can try, but I can
Yeah,
say
just do it.
well, we I can say from the bottom of my heart that Machiavelli was a genius in
Totally.
defining ethics,
Yeah, absolutely.
because even if you read the works of Thomas Huxley, who was a controversialist for that matter, but
Yeah.
he instilled many basic influences within Machiavelli's work to typify the biological aspects of animals and especially in humans in
Right.
general. He
Sure.
felt that the relationship between both of them have somewhat similar traits, but not
Yeah.
necessarily in the order of things that typify the natural variations between order and death, and
Yeah.
to basically mix them up all together to define what it is that defines their own ethical values based on a traditionalist society, etc., etc.
Right. It's interesting because in Isaiah Berlin, the originality of Machiavelli, he says that in Machiavelli, you get the first time perspective taking.
Yes,
That Machiavelli says, the perspective of this society, this culture is very different than over here. And
yes,
Machiavelli says it's basically up to you, which one you choose depending upon the result you get. Now, this was very scandalous,
oh
right?
yes,
Because to even suggest such a thing was very
yes,
scandalous, particularly in the 1600s, right? 16.
oh yes, because at that
Yeah,
time, many
yeah.
officials, especially the Borgias, for
There's
example,
only one way to,
oh
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
they were very shocked at this thought,
Yeah.
and as Machiavelli's ideas spread in
Mhm.
his lifetime,
Yeah.
they felt that he was a subversive,
Sure.
and they
Which,
tried to censor his works to the point where they basically burned the
yep,
original copy of the prince, but many other copies were saved, just to
yep.
give you a clear idea. But he himself was considered to be a controversialist in his own namesake because he wanted to create the distinction between order and society. So if you equivalent that into today's society, whereas the crumbling capitalism that we're all experiencing,
That's it.
Machiavelli was right all along because he understood how power works, how
Right.
power is instilled, and how power can be influenced. Frederick
He
Engels,
also he also understood that power can be transformed
oh
and
yes,
altered. That it's not
yeah,
forever. It's not inevitable. It's not right. It's not forever. It's not,
yes,
yeah, which is an important
yes. Frederick Engels was very much
point. Yeah,
influenced by Machiavelli
he was.
because there was a shift in political thought between the Marxists and even the socialists and anarchists of that particular ideology. Because
Right.
after 1855, or should I say 1857 for that matter, there was a general shift in political thought
Yeah.
because at that time, Engels wrote many articles attacking Marx's Communist Manifesto
Sure.
because he himself believed that it did not address the issues of humane society that
Right.
revolves around man and the worker. So there
Yeah.
was not only a shift in that, but there was also a new type of shift, whereas governmental control of the worker can mean that the
Hmm.
creativity and even the free
Yeah.
thinking aspects of the worker can be
Right.
aligned based solely for the purpose of achieving that type of contribution
Well,
and the contribution.
that's the have you so I highly recommend Heinrich's biography of Marx. Do you know about this new biography?
I've heard of it.
I've just finished the first volume, and there's two volumes to come, but it's really important and connects to what you're talking about because it's basically the unsung Marx, or sort of the, I don't know. I think you would really like it. I mean,
Oh yeah.
I think especially if you are a Marxist, you gotta.
Oh yeah.
This is as big a deal, I think, in Marxist scholarship probably as anything is any of the classic, from the.
Yeah. I
Uh,
think I think today, well, I think the Marxism of the 21st century is still the same as in the last century because
yeah,
people tend to think that the Marxism of the 21st century was somewhat revolutionary, but despite the attacks by the
yeah,
right wing in general, especially many right wing conservatives and even the two-party dictatorship, whereas they tried to simplify Marxism as a form of Platonic fascism, which I
yeah,
disagree. I
sure,
think that both centuries that are aligned within the Marxist thought continue to emold and even advance the
right,
shaping of humanity in general. And I think that in this century, we might see a revival of that, typically
probably.
only for the sake of realizing the dream within Marx that man is born free based on the creativity of their own mastery of their
Mhm.
own environment.
Well, that's
So,
what Heinrich talks about, because Heinrich in this book says that Marx. Um, so the mistake that historical Marxism made, according to Heinrich, is
yes,
that they reversed Marx's original. Um, in Marx, and this is Heinrich's reading, and I'm undecided. I don't know. I thought about it. In Marx, consciousness is actually first, and the
yes,
powers of subjectivity is first.
yes,
Isn't that interesting? Totally the opposite of what we were taught, when we were taught. And it has something to do with the ability, it has to do with the precondition of freedom. So, Marx has this image of you hunt in the afternoon, you critique after dinner. Do you know this thing?
yeah,
You hunt in the afternoon, you create food, the idea of the person doing all these things.
yes,
It has to do with freedom as a precondition.
yes.
Freedom as a precondition. And that's the part of Marx that I do like. I don't think Marx totally succeeded in that personally, but I do think that's the part of Marx that I do like, and I do think that I think a lot of Marxists would do well to go back at that. But anyway, I talked for too much. But I wasn't aware about the. Of course, I'm a little bit. There were conflicts between Engels and Marx, right? There was
Yes.
kind of they weren't like married couple really. Well, they were in some ways, but they weren't. They were a quarreling couple, right? Sometimes too, right? I mean,
Oh yeah, I mean, within the Marxist spectra, I mean, there has to have well, they had conflicts, but even before the thought of Marxism came into being, because the whole identity of being a Marxist is to define the metaphysics of reality within societal aspects and their own point of view.
sure.
So, as Marx, who wrote that society is based on a scientific approach towards society and whatnot,
Mhm.
then it is the worker who is the scientist, because the scientist has to have
That's
a
true.
questioning of thought, and the thought
Yeah.
itself, which is a generalization of how, when, why we got into this point, and how the foundations of that society are intertwined with each
Yeah.
other. So, I think going back as far as, well, even before the revolutions of 1848, you have to go
Wow.
back as far as 1837.
Mm-hmm.
Because in 1837, when Queen Victoria was crowned, there was a new shifting of movement even prior before the establishment of the Marxist thought that there were many thinkers, especially English thinkers, that had their own type of socialism. And that type of socialism was basically influential in the foundation of another type of socialism that was conceived even before the dawn of the 20th century.
Do you consider William Morris as part of that, or would you not put William Morris in that?
I think William Morris is a very great Marxist because he himself has basically defined the aspects of what Marxism really is. And besides William Morris, I don't know if you've heard of Michael Parenti.
I know Mike Parenti, yeah.
Yeah, he's still around. I think he's 92 years old, but he's not.
NYU still, I think. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Michael Parenti, who is a very great Marxist scholar, and I've listened to a lot of his lectures on YouTube. He has defined his own generalization of what Marxism really is, because when you speak about Marxism today, it's considered to be a dirty word. Even if you're a non-Marxist yourself, when you a believer of so-called laissez-faire capitalism, they think that Marx got it all wrong. When in fact, it's not the case, because Marx.
What Marx got right. So hold that thought. So to me, and again, I'm a non-Marxist, right? He gets that there's this instability. He gets the crack in the system.
Yes.
And that's the thing that he understands, right? That's kind of the I guess it would be the elephant in the room that nobody.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
I think that if many people, well, generally speaking, Marxism, when you think about that word, especially if you're a believer of so-called laissez-faire capitalism, which doesn't exist at all, it typically refines the general attitude that Marx and Marxism are reflective on the general aspects of the beholder, and the beholder itself is intertwined in basically discussing the merits of societal impact. So going back to the example I mentioned to you, and especially Michael Parenti in particular, who is a very fine scholar and a very fine Marxist, he has known for many years, and especially throughout the development of humanity since millennia, that the scientific prospects of man's spiritual and developmental growth is based on the haves and the have-nots, and the attitude towards different types of classes, even going back as far as before the establishment of the feudal era, because in Africa,
You mean before feudalism?
Yeah,
that's going back pretty far. That's village. That's
Yeah,
that's going
because if you study ancient Africa, there were civilizations that predate socialism, and they had their own communal communities where they distribute the wealth to the masses, and they use the wealth they have to benefit for their own sake and to benefit their own aspects of what they themselves can provide for each other. So if you think about many empires and kingdoms that were established even prior before the Judeo-Christian era, there was a different type of socialism that really worked for them, because they themselves were the first socialists, even before the Bible was actually written, because if you read if you read several transcripts of the Bible as well, the earliest apostles in the Old Testament were socialists.
All of them. Well, that opens up a whole, because so I mean, I take Christianity itself as a religion is part of socialist tradition.
Oh yeah,
which is really ironic, because look at how Christians have embraced the right wing and denied the socialists. But that's a whole other. That's right.
I mean, So anyway, if you study the Old Testament, there are several scriptures that relate towards socialism. If you read the book of Matthew, there's one section where it transcribes that there's one scripture that tells you that if you plant a seed and if it grows, and if you plant that seed tenfold, it grows manifestive.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is that it provides that the growth and the seed that is within the earth, it refines upon the sharing of the wealth and the sharing of resources, because we need to share those resources to benefit what others might don't have. Because the conception of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, despite its corruptive nature, and I'll tell you more. I'll tell you that more in a second. Is the actual true wisdom of these religions is the reflectiveness that the working class is contributive towards the environment, and the environment per se is reflective on the beholder, where we become the observers of all things that are intuitive, and within this intuition that we all have based on our observations, then it is refined by knowing and sharing with each other the humane aspects of what a society could be without all the corruption involved.
Yeah. That's it. That's really well put. I mean, it's interesting. I didn't know we would be getting to all these things. Is there anything that you left out you want to talk about, since either about autism or ableism, or
well
ableism, or just whatever, any ideas or about what you?
Well, I want to go back to my autism journey, because I think you might be interested. So, getting back to what I said an hour ago, since we're now under the 61-minute mark.
Oh, do we have a deadline?
Huh?
Oh, do we have a deadline? Is there a certain?
Oh, no. I mean, we can talk as long as I.
Right.
Anyway, so the reading, for example, has helped me to define my own wisdom, and it has given me a lot of sense and purpose, to the point where I have a strong respect towards intellectualism. And I think that if people continue to embody this thought, then I think the world wouldn't be such a very hectic place to live on. Because I think that nowadays we're getting more anti-intellectual by the second.
Yeah.
And I think that we need to get back to the basics of things, because in all of us who have a deep, refined sense of the written word, we have a unique chance to change things for the better. And I think it goes through not only books, but through observation. So, as a matter of fact, one of the books I'm currently reading right now, I'll show you the book right now. Let me give me 1 second. Currently, I'm reading.
Now, you really are reading more than one book at a time, right?
Well, yes, I read.
I like very much your suit. Are you going to talk about how you get your stuff is all vintage? Let me show you this. Let me show you something. I wore a vintage suit coat for you.
Really?
Yep. Just because, in honor. This is from 1969. Look at the date on that.
Nice.
This is from one of the tailors that made Sean Connery's clothing of 007 James Bond. You can see from the lapels, and you can see. That's like, isn't that something? I thought you'd appreciate that. It's not 30s. I apologize.
That's what I know.
It's 60s, but. And this tie's 30s, though. So anyhow, I didn't mean to.
Yeah.
You're gonna get the book. I'm kind of get train of thought here. Where's the book?
Well, here it is. It's John Lewis Gaddis's George F. Keenan: An American Life. I'll show you the cover of the book.
He's great. Oh, I love Keenan.
Yeah.
I love Keenan.
Yes.
So you read the biography? See, that's I have to confess, I haven't read that yet. That's on my to-do. That's on my list.
Yeah.
So you know that.
In case if you don't know who George F. Keenan was, he's basically the second ambassador to the Soviet Union.
That's right.
And throughout the Truman administration, he was primarily responsible for writing a detailed report, which is now basically known as the Keenan Telegram. And it basically talks about the threat of the Soviet Union as a dominant superpower. But at the same time, the United States and the Soviet Union had different geopolitical interests.
That's true.
So basically, in the telegram, he stated that the Soviet Union was a threat to America's interests, rather than the fact that they own inward abilities as a nation would be derived solely for the purpose of dealing with the understanding of the Russian people themselves, most specifically Stalin, who Harry S. Truman felt that he was a figurehead.
Mm.
And I think that for his part of that, I
Mm.
think that there was a lot of mistrust between both Truman and Mr. Keenan
Interesting.
because there were some direct talks between himself and Truman because
Mm.
he wanted to continue establishing relations with the Soviet Union even after Franklin
The
Delano
level.
Roosevelt
Right.
established relations with the Soviet Union in 1934.
Right.
And Truman himself wanted to condense that because he felt that he wanted to condense that because he felt that it was going too much in terms of influence.
Yeah.
Most specifically, the growing outcomes of what will later become the third world, for that matter, the
Mm.
anti-colonialist and
Right. Right.
anti-capitalist struggle
Sure.
to remain neutral.
Mm.
So by 1947 to 1948, and this was even before the start of the McCarthy era,
Yeah.
and the hearings that were underway by the House Un-American Activities Committee, and of course he had to deal with the Green Party, which was run by the Green Party at that time, which was basically a progressive leftist party.
You're talking about Henry Wallace? Do you see Henry
Huh?
Wallace? Are you talking about Henry Wallace or the?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, because he met with Henry Wallace
Yeah.
before the telegram came out, and he wanted to continue establishing diplomatic relations with the Soviet Union because
Mm.
himself and William Z. Foster, who was one of the founding heads, he was one of the heads of the American Communist Party.
Yeah.
Um, they gravitated towards the Soviet Union because they felt that its paradise of market distribution and the freedom of the worker from exploitation was beneficial within the prospects of the American worker. And
Yeah.
Mr. King himself viewed that as somewhat of a threat because he felt that geopolitical interests inside the United States and even in Europe during the Marshall Plan, it felt that it was constituted as a threat.
Right.
And throughout the Truman administration, they were trying to play second fiddle to Stalin because Stalin knew at that time that the telegram existed, and furthermore, he
Right.
felt that the growth and power of American military might throughout the entire world was basically influential in the prevention and even the growth and namesake of industrial interests which were not aligned towards so-called democratic values.
Right.
So I
Well, it's
think,
interesting you're reading that book because I'm sure there's a lot of things in there that you're
yeah,
learning that I haven't.
yes. I'm also reading Anthony Abbott's The Rise of Rome.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah, I'm halfway done. I'm halfway through the book though, and the next book I'm going to read is one book by Robert Greene. I forgot the name of the book, but revolves. Oh yes, the Laws of Nature.
Laws of nature. Right.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
and I'm planning to read My Life in Art by Stravinsky.
Oh wow. I have a copy of that somewhere around here. Robert Kraft and
Oh yes,
Stravinsky.
yeah.
Really great.
So I keep my mind very stimulated
I
all the
guess so.
time.
What do
Yeah.
you think about John Lewis Gaddis as an historian? Do you agree with the popular perception that he's really one of the best?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
I think he's a very great historian, but I think that his
Yeah.
own analysis of the Soviet Union was somewhat um, not basic to a degree because even
Yeah.
after 1946, despite the leadership of Joseph Stalin and many people in the left continued to criticize him as some sort of a tyrannical figurehead, and many people in the left who continued to praise Stalin, many people left the American Communist Party for that matter because they felt that he was trying to destroy what Lenin worked for, even during and after the Russian Revolution.
I mean, I don't. That's a whole. That could be its own episode. You know, the history of the history of communism, actual communism.
Yes.
It's a very it's quite a history. It's quite a history, and it's really complex. I sort of think I don't know where you want to go next. Do you want to do you want to talk more about autism? You will probably work through.
Yeah.
You went through. I mean, at a certain point before we conclude, I want to play some music for you.
Oh, good.
And the music I play for you will reflect you in music.
Oh, yeah.
I do this with guests sometimes. I did it with, I don't know. Yeah, I try to do it when I can. So let me know when you're ready for that. But continue to talk about your autism. Because so I guess you feel differently now than you did 10 years ago, right? Or 8 years ago about autism, and sort of you're kind of it's kind of like a journey. It's evolution, right? And I'm wondering,
yes. Yeah. I mean, I was diagnosed when I was 3 years old because between 2.5, well, actually 2 to 2.5 years old, I was mute. I couldn't even speak a word at all, and they felt that something was wrong with me. So it took me to an evaluation, and they found out that I was on the autism spectrum.
Right.
So they put me in a special class where I could interact with my own kin. And as time evolved, I grew up with this notion that, well, unfortunately, in my own personal observation of things, at that time, I felt that I was less than because they felt that I was different. But as I got older, especially before my teens, I realized that I had to grow as a person and to be more reflective within myself. So the more I did that,
do you mind if I ask you a question? Because you really, right now, you're a great speaker, really exceptional.
Thank you.
And I'm sure some of that's hard work on your part. Maybe it's natural, but you said that you didn't talk earlier. You did not. So I guess I'm wondering how did you develop this out of that? I guess that's probably a big topic, but does this connect to what you're?
Well, I did. Well, I underwent a lot of speech therapy growing up, so I was able to recognize the strengths and values that I have. But I did most of the work by myself because I wanted to improve my own lot in regarding the reflections of my own true self and my own true nature. So as time went by, even before my 20s, I got even better at it. So the way I'm speaking now is reflective on my progress because in my own personal credo, progress means that the entire reflection of your own self is single-handedly worked on within the beholder. And if you're a big believer in fate, then fate will reward you in a way that benefits your true wisdom and your own true self.
Fate.
Yes.
In the beholder.
Because in order to understand your true knowledge of self, you have to ask yourself these provocative questions. What do you want to do to better yourself? What do you want to be within yourself? How to know yourself when you want to be in yourself, and to be in yourself when you're at best within yourself. So,
do you mind repeating those questions? I'm going to write them down because they're great.
Oh, what's good, the first
one? I had I'm going to write these down. Can you remember what you just said there?
Yes.
Does the audience mind if they're what did you say? What you want to? What was the first one? It was
to be yourself, to get to know yourself. That's number one.
Get to know yourself, right? The audience is going to have a great a self-help part of the show here.
Oh yes.
Get to know yourself, and what's this? And then
get to know yourself within. Get to know yourself within yourself to be yourself.
To be yourself. Okay.
Number 3 is to be yourself within yourself to know yourself.
Interesting. To be yourself within yourself to know yourself. That's interesting.
And lastly, to know yourself. Yeah, to know yourself within yourself to be whatever of yourself.
Huh.
With that, it generally means that after you complete your inner journey towards enlightenment, you have to have these four in tow. And combining them all together, you achieve complete satisfaction and elation. You cannot have that unless if you're distracted. Because even if you're distracted, then you have to have something that does not align by what society tells you. Because society is going to tell you all the time that you can't do this or you can't do that. Or they'll tell you the other thing, oh, that's life. Because you have to ask yourself a lot of questions all the time. You can't just stick around and let people walk all over you. Because when you get to know yourself, then you get to know yourself now. So by that time, you realize that within certain points that define your inner wisdom is defined by your true and innermost sanctum that is within your own consciousness. And consciousness or any variation of consciousness whatsoever, it defines solely for the purpose of achieving wisdom and achieving a form of wisdom that is aligned by the beholder.
The beholder. You want to say more about that, or is that kind of
that's about it.
How do you feel? The beholder? It's interesting.
Well, when I say the beholder, I mean the master of yourself, because I've read Nietzsche. I think Nietzsche is one of the great philosophers ever. I have one of his books on the ethics of genealogy and esse homo. And in the book, if you read the entire book overall, it states that within man's capacity, they have the interrelationship between the person and the person itself, who is by the beholder. The beholder is generally the master who knows his or her own craft. So you get to know the craftsmanship of that person, but the craftsmanship is created solely for the individualist self, because you can't be an individualist by becoming your own master. So being your own master is the namesake of gaining and supplementing control within your own life. And if you have a knowledge of self and you have a master of your own environment, then all things come to pass, and you generally have overcome everything that has stood against you, and how it really benefits what we are in this world, and realizing that all things have to come to a certain degree of any beginning, middle, and the end. So all these three have to have something in line, and that is semblance. And if you don't have any type of semblance in you, then you're just wasting your time. In other words, why are you wasting your time when you're dealing with your whole wisdom, which is supplemented by outside forces who are against you and want to take a grab at you solely for the purpose of dealing with your own personal namesake, and how they want to use that against you for purposes of a nature that is not all your own.
I mean, I'm very, So is that connected to when you talk about fate? Is that what is it like a coming together?
Well, yes.
You mentioned the word enlightenment and fate, and these, of course, as you know, there's a lot of volumes written about these words and what they mean.
Oh, yes.
So
I think that what Stephanie and I, Stephanie and I agree on one thing, and that is
only one.
Well, there's more.
Okay.
But the one.
I wish you had her here. I wish you were here. I just kind of.
Because
watching? No. Hey, Stephanie.
Well, she is watching, by the way, so you can say hi to her.
Hello, Stephanie. I hope you.
Hey, Stephanie, how are you?
Good.
Yeah.
This is.
Stephanie and I have something in common, and that is the metaphysical self. And we, as metaphysical people, we are aligned towards dealing with the inner destiny of our spiritual, mental, psychoanalytical, and psychological selves. So we go through this process all the time, and we define our own true wisdom, because our wisdom makes us even stronger.
Okay.
And when we have that, then we can say for ourselves that we breathe in and breathe out our lungs freely without any hindrances. So we deal with this aspect, and we deal with what we can to benefit these types of contributions, and the contributions that we're going to have, unless we ourselves take the bait in taking risks. So always take risks
Always
when,
take risks. Huh.
yes, always take risks when you're trying to do something that benefits you and you only. Because nobody is ever going to tell you this.
Hold on. Always take risks when you're trying to do something that benefits you only.
Yes. And then
is what you're hold on, and then so is what you're saying is that a mistake people often do is that they don't take the risk. So it looks to me like people can make one of two mistakes. They either are afraid to take a risk, or they don't know what would benefit or harm them. They're unaware.
well, yes,
Right? Unaware. So those are two things that come to mind, right? Those are you have
yes,
to know,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah, because when many people try to presume that they're perfect and they're not, then you have to try to be, well, you try to become a perfectionist.
Well,
Because even perfectionist people are very eccentric. And I don't want to diss, yeah,
people, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
yeah. I could say wholeheartedly that I myself am an eccentric, because
Yeah, I am too. Yeah.
because
Stephanie's
we,
an eccentric.
yeah,
Yeah, clearly.
we align towards the reality of the destiny that is within
Right,
us.
right.
So when we say to ourselves that we define our own inner happenings, then
Yeah.
we always reflect on our own inhibitions, and the inhibitions that are truly for the sake of the comeuppance of the beholder, then it goes both ways. So
Right.
eccentricity and being different from the norm are two of the greatest things you could ever have, because you could align yourself by reacting and changing the minds and hearts of others. And even if you're an eccentric, then you can also change your own perceptions of yourself,
Yeah.
and knowing that people will love you for it, even though they might hate
Huh.
you for becoming different.
So they'll in the end love you for it. They'll see the integrity of it.
Yes. So I think that the ability of the individual is based on one simple thing, and that is to defy barriers, destroy all barriers, and create something new, which will not only shock people, but also change the minds and hearts of others.
Wow. Huh. You give me a lot to think about, Eddie. I have to say. I have to say.
Thank you.
I'm
Thank
very. I even wrote things down. It's not always that I write stuff down.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm gonna play a little music and then we'll say goodbye and conclude. Is that okay?
Oh,
So I
sure.
guess I have to move. I don't know what. Again, this is my attempt to describe you in music, which is, after all, not the easiest thing. I don't think. Didn't say it was going to be easy, but I don't know.
Wonderful, Mitch. Wonderful.
I don't know how accurate that was, but that's
I can honestly say though, it has a touch of Gershwin with a bit
well,
of
sure.
Copeland. Well,
Well, that's funny.
Yeah, I can also see a influx of Copeland and even Aaron Copland, the composer.
I love Copeland, but I was not aware of that. I didn't know that was.
Yeah, because I've listened to some of Copeland's compositions, and they also have a very distinctive influence between modern jazz and even the swing genre in general. Because if you listen to one of his compositions, which is the Appletinian Spring from 1942, which is one of my favorite compositions.
That's a great piece with Martha Graham, the Martha Graham choreography. Yeah.
One of the things that he does in the composition is he reflects on the naturalist scene and imagining himself to be a part of that scene, where he acknowledges that the existence of nature all around us is typified by the beholder. And I think that the individual has a kind of destiny within him, or her for that matter, to really become much of what nature intends us to be. So I think that by studying his compositions, because Copland himself is still one of the great American composers.
Oh, I love Copland. Yeah. I have you can't see, I have all scores of Copland and biographies, and I've got I can bring out all my Copland biographies. So you were shrewd to. Yeah. This particular piece is not really. I mean, maybe it was Copland, but it's much more. I don't know. I think a lot more Art Tatum, and it's a little different.
Yeah, I mean, Art Tatum is a great jazz pianist, because I listen to him all the time. Yeah. As a matter of fact, my coming back to what I said earlier before the interview, that my preferences for music is classical music and jazz.
Sure.
In case if anybody doesn't realize, for that matter, and especially in my life in general, one of my earliest memories growing up, being on the spectrum, is when I was about, I think, 1.5 years old. The first jazz record I listened to was Nat King Cole's variation of Route 66.
Oh, wow. It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
It's such a beautiful.
Yeah.
You heard that?
Wow. Yeah. But many people don't realize that it was written in 1946, and it was. I mean, well, actually, it was composed in 1943, but it wasn't recorded in 1946 because of the 1942-1944 musician strike.
The musician strike.
And and one of the things I love about Route 66, it has a deep 3/4 up tempo beat that is clearly in line with the rhythm and blues subgenre. So I think that with many people who have recorded Route 66 since then, and it's considered to be a jazz standard, it's considered to be a jazz standard to this day, with music and lyrics by Johnny Mercer. One of the great.
It was a TV show too in the 50s.
Oh yeah.
It was really well written. And then of course I'm sure you know the Manhattan Transfer version.
Oh yeah, great. I think the great one. I think if you compare the arrangers of today, I mean, Walter Murphy is one of the great arrangers. I think the man who composed a fifth of Beethoven.
Beethoven.
Yeah.
Who thought?
Yeah.
We'd be discussing him today.
Yeah. Generally, I can see him as a latter-day Nelson Riddle.
Yeah.
And
that was something.
Yeah. And comparing Walter Murphy with Nelson Riddle,
never thought of that.
Great arrangers.
Yeah.
typically aligned by their craftsmanship and their greatness for authentic taste, especially in music. And I think we lost some of that in jazz today because basically pop has moved itself towards the jazz genre and subgenres, and they turn it into something else. But I think, as we all know, music has to evolve somehow. So we tend to come up with new forms of music, especially rap music and electronica, EDM, and now with many other variations of electronica, such as teen pop and techno pop.
Right.
So I think that as we go along throughout this decade and the next several decades to come, we might see a whole new shift in music because music is ever shifting.
You can have.
I think that well, the one thing that I agree with is the great quote by none other than the great Linda Ronstadt, who said that musicianship is based on three things: story, craftsmanship, and the telling of the story throughout, based on the experiences of that individual.
Mm-hmm.
So if you read her autobiography, which is Simple Dreams, and
it's beautiful,
and yeah, and she's coming out with a new book in October called Feels Like Home, where she talks about her childhood, and I'm a big fan of hers. I love her music, especially her music with
Nelson Riddle.
Nelson Riddle.
It's like that's wow. Yeah. I didn't know you were a fan of those albums.
Yeah. If you listen to her variation of What's New, which is one of those I mean, she hits it from the heart.
Well, first of all, the tempo is incredible.
Oh yeah.
Everybody does it the wrong tempo.
Yeah, because with Linda, when she did that, she had something that really aligns within the heart. And if you look up the music video which she did, which is on YouTube now, and I can tell you it's very fabulous. I mean, from the beginning to the end, it's still fabulous.
Oh yeah.
It touches the heartstrings, and you realize that within yourself. And if you listen to it time and time again, you say to yourself, "That's music." And she did great things for the rehabilitation of the Great American Songbook that nobody else did. Because in an interview that she did, she wanted to bring them out of the elevators because at that time it was going through a rough phase where it was all elevator music, and the great crooners such as Sinatra, Rosemary Clooney, and basically many of the so on and so on. They were being reduced to lounge acts, and she felt that it wasn't like that because the whole aspect of American popular music was the standards. So even if you listen to two of her under albums that she did with Nelson Riddle, Lush Life and For Sentimental Reasons, one song which she did around midnight, which is a standard by the great Thelonious Monk. She executes that perfectly. She comes up slow and she goes along whispering into the atmosphere within the words and how they seduce to each other. And it's the same way with I'm a Fool to Want You. And all of it combines much great substance. You could, I mean, in her own namesake, and even with the songs that she did with her collaboration with Nelson Riddle, it defines meaning. And to this day, when people hear those types of songs, especially those three albums, people get so blown away by her versatility, because not any artist in any generation can even achieve such caliber. And I think that she has been the most influential artist that ever was and ever will be. And I think that she has a place within every generational fan base who has been touched by her singing. And I think that because unfortunately because of her Parkinson's, which was re-diagnosed as progressive supranuclear palsy, which robs her of the ability to sing because of the brain impeculiarities that prevent her from breaking that high note. I think that I think that we've lost part of her singing that we grow up so much and how it has
Yeah.
influenced generations.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I for myself, I've also listened to her one of her other albums, which was Canciones de mi Padre, which I've listened to when I was growing up, which is still one of the best-selling albums of all time.
Right.
And not many people know this, but she is Mexican German,
Mm-hmm.
and people get shocked by that because they thought that she never had any type of darker skin within her, and they felt that she was some sort of a chip off the old block or some sort.
Mm-hmm.
So
No, she's that's no,
yeah,
she's one of the greats in my book. She's one of the top singers.
yeah,
One of the great singers. Not, and I'm happy to hear you mention her.
yeah,
And that's wow. This has been quite a conversation. So we discussed so many things.
yeah,
I just want to thank you for your generosity and time, and we should do this again, maybe.
yeah.
I mean, ideally, let's try to talk to Stephanie and have the three of us.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Oh yeah, I think we
We
should
should
do a three-way conversation because I think
absolutely.
that, in all intents and purposes, I think
Yeah.
that we had a lot of fun talking.
Oh,
And I think that with our own similar traits that we talked about, especially for us people on the spectrum,
Yep.
I could say on a high note that I'm proud to be on the spectrum, and
Yeah.
I'm proud to be who I am because I've changed so much.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, regardless what if they hate me or not, because sometimes on Facebook I get a lot of hate messages talking about how worthy I am and how much paragraphs I post up on my Facebook page,
Right.
which I have to ban a lot of people because of their insignificance and their immaturity.
Well,
Then I think that the best way to have your own best revenge is by being yourself, and being yourself is knowing what you're going to do that day, waking
sure.
up
And that's all you got.
yeah,
Yeah.
because many people don't have that.
Yeah. I mean,
And even if you inspire yourself to be the better person you're meant to be, then you have the potential in you to change what you think is wrong and do something that is right. Because nobody is ever gonna tell you that you can be good or you can be bad, because it's a choice of knowing whether you're going to do it and whether if you're planning to slack off and not do anything and letting people stoop over you. So I think that a lot of people need to realize that if you believe in yourself, despite what many people go against you, then all you have to say is do the best you can and just go with the flow, because I think that in the end it pays off. And I could say that since I'm almost 27 years old in October, yeah, I'm 26 now. I'm going to be 26 in October. And,
well, so you're a Libra like me.
Oh yes.
I'm October 22nd, and you're what? You're October. What was it?
October 20th.
What do you make of that? And that's
well, I'm not shocked at all because
we're birthdays 2 days away, both Libras. Except I'm 54. I'm not 27. I got to tell you, Eddie, 27 seems so long ago. Maybe it wasn't that long ago. I don't know.
Yeah, because a lot of people like to tell me all the time that I look older, and they get shocked when I tell them that I'm younger. I mean, even if I tell them I'm 26 years old, they wouldn't believe it because they thought I'm older. And
but you look your age. You don't look old.
Yeah.
What they mean is that you speak intelligently, and so you speak.
Oh
old.
Yeah. I best describe myself as an old soul. So
yeah,
I like a lot of vintage.
Yeah.
I like a lot of vintage, and I think that there's a lot of great influences in my life that I would like to talk about in the next conversation that we're going to have with Stephanie, hopefully in the not too distant future.
Okay.
But I can end it on a high note by stating that whatever that you do when it refines all things vintage, and as a matter of fact, not to change the subject, but tomorrow I'll be taking part in a nostalgic fan trip to the Rockaways on the 1930s R19 subway cars. And I'll be meeting up with some of the rail enthusiast people that I know. I'll
Wow.
be dressing up in casual vintage, so I'll
Sure.
be wearing an ascot.
The
But
cat.
yeah, yeah, I might be even. I even might be wearing a beret that day. But let's see what happens because
Very
temperatures here are
temperatures are
going to be
90, probably 88.
well, not exactly because tomorrow we're gonna have temperatures in the morning. Temperatures are gonna be in somewhere around 67 to 69 degrees, when
Oh,
the afternoon is gonna be 79.
okay.
So it's
But
not too hot,
tonight
not
is
too cold.
cool. Right. That's
Yeah.
good.
But
That's
the good thing though is that yesterday
hmm.
they released this year's predictions for the 2022-2023 almanac,
Okay.
and they're predicting. I don't know if you know this, but
No.
they're predicting that we're gonna have a lot of frigid temperatures, unlike many years past, and we're gonna have a lot of heavy snow starting
Oh,
around January.
okay.
Yeah. So
Well, I
even
don't
though
know.
a lot of people don't like winter, and even though winter is my favorite season,
Oh,
even even though many people like to disagree with me because they complain about, oh, you can't go anywhere, and
yeah.
the sidewalk is all slippery and all that. I
Well,
mean, I'll take winter
yeah.
because the best thing that you could ever enjoy about a season is its girth, warmth, and
Hmm.
the reality of believing that it fuels your soul. I
Hmm.
remember one time, actually back in January, we had a very huge snowstorm. We got about, I think, 10 to 12 inches, but not a
I
lot.
remember that. I remember
And I went outside and I was walking down um, Woodside Avenue, and it was so fogged up, you couldn't even see anything. And
Huh.
as I was walking down, and as I was taking videos, there's a video that I took,
Yeah.
which I posted on Instagram,
Hmm.
of of the heaviest of the heavy snow coming down, all set to music by Villa Lobos.
Oh, I love you a lot.
Um, um,
Buck and Alice, the Buck
yeah,
and Alice is so
yeah,
good.
great composer.
Hmm.
In the video, in the video and in the caption below, I talk about how it gives you a sense of identity, and the seasons, no matter how they change, they give you that authentic mirthness
Yeah.
that really gives you a sense of quality and the welcoming quality that defines all things that will come to pass now and forever. So
Forever.
you
Interesting.
really have to understand that all seasons have to change somehow, but the one
Sure.
season that you have to really align by the innermost standards of knowing your true
Huh.
self and your true destiny is excuse me, the things that you recline yourself to be, and in total, you shape your own image and the mentality that gives you that
Hmm.
image in
Hmm.
order to be your own self, whether if it's better or likewise.
Well, thank you, Eddie. That was very inspiring. And talk to Stephanie, and I'll talk to my producer, Laurie, and we'll do it.
Oh
Some
yeah,
we'll do it somehow.
Mitch, thank you for inviting me to be on the show. I had a very wonderful time, and it was a very stimulating talk overall. And I have to say, I'm a great admirer of your work, and
Oh,
I've listened to the CD that you
yeah.
sent me,
Oh,
and yeah, and I just want to say thank you for sending me that
uh-huh.
because your compositions are very wonderful, no doubt about that. I think that you will go down history as a very fine composer
Oh,
because I know that you have something that really benefits from you. And I can see you as a
oh,
modern, I know it's shocking, but I can say this from the bottom of my heart.
oh.
You are a modern day Aaron Copland with a touch of Stravinsky for that matter.
That's very nice of you, Eddie. I don't know. That's fine. I don't. I just do what I can. But thank you.
Yeah.
That's
Oh,
very
and by the
kind.
way, I'll be watching your performance on the 27th, if I'm correct.
First, I
The
think.
the 21st, which
Well,
is the end of summer concert, which you're gonna do
right. So,
quartet. I don't know if Stephanie might be watching that, but I might tell her.
well, we'll get a bit. I hope we can do a. One of my directions before I go of the show is to have more roundtable type of things.
Oh
More
yeah,
than just two people. And tech wise, we're able to do it now. if you're 3 to 4 people. So let's work on that. Let's do it.
Oh, yeah, we will. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for the compliments and everything, and be safe. And
thank you.
I guess I'll see you next Sunday or whenever that is, that concert.
So, yes.
Enjoy the railway.
On YouTube Live, I believe.
I think so.
Yeah. But if not, watch it on YouTube where you might be recording it. So
recording. But that's the way things are now.
Yeah.
That's the way everything is.
I have the time and place to watch it, but nevertheless, it's going to be a very great concert. So I wish you luck with that.
Thank you.
By the way, I'm also going to send you some photographs and videos of the event tomorrow. So keep in touch on that.
I will.
And I'll be sending you more videos on my favorite types of music via Messenger. So hopefully we'll continue to keep in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you, Eddie.
Mitch, great talking to you. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you for everything. I hope that Stephanie is watching, but thank you, Stephanie, for doing it, for getting us together for the interview. Hopefully you'll get the chance to join us very soon. And Mitch, take good care of yourself. Stay safe. Stay travels along the way. Be careful. Keep in touch. Sweet dreams. Autistic and neurodivergent power all the way. Salutations on whatever you're doing that makes you happy in your spare time. Have a good weekend ahead. And happy reading books and knowledge all day and every day.
Thank you.